Where friendship arises, there will always be a bond that is shared. It will begin in a social setting, be it a school, a workplace, or on the internet, and something will draw the friends to each other. Most often this will be shared interests, or similar worldviews. For Walt and Jesse, it was cooking methamphetamine. The single most important relationship in Breaking Bad, and that which catapults the entire plot, is between Walt and Jesse. Although it begins years before the show, as Jesse was Walt's student in high school, the first time we are introduced to Jesse is on the drug bust Hank brings Walt along. We see a frantic Jesse stumbling out of a window and making a run for it, after his meth lab is raided by law enforcement. Enticed by the allure of the drug business, Walt tracks Jesse down and makes him an offer he cannot refuse. He blackmails him. This rocky beginning to their relationship encapsulates its inherent volatility, as although it begins as a coerced business relationship, it doesn't take long for it to radically transform, much in the same way the duo begins working with Saul later in the show. At the core of every friendship is an archetype that it resembles. There are those where friends are equals, equal in the sense that they are in the same stage of life, with similar abilities and possessions. These friends are like siblings who grow together. There are others whom resemble a younger and older sibling, where one acts as an older brother that guides the younger in some aspect of life. These friends are also quite similar in age and abilities, but one is slightly more ahead in one part of life, and thus wishes to help his friend ahead to where he is. And lastly, there is the son and the father friendship, where there is a significant difference in age and life position. One friend has passed almost everything in life and acts almost as a mentor to the other, like a father figure. Walt assumes this paternal role towards Jesse more than he does towards his own son. Even though their relationship is very unstable, the one constant throughout the show is that Walt is always devoting thought or energy towards Jesse, whether it's positive or negative. Even throughout the first season, Walt goes out of his way for Jesse on multiple occasions, most notably when he goes back to avenge his partner when he is beaten and robbed by drug lord Tuco. And in the second season, after Jane's death, Walt goes out of his way to find a spiraling Jesse in a drug house, pulling him out and enrolling him into rehab, very likely saving his life from an overdose. While in rehab, Walt even consoles Jesse, who is blaming himself for Jane's death. It's moments like this that highlight Walt's paternal role towards Jesse, and yet there are many more moments that signal precisely the opposite, and highlight the complex power dynamic between the pair. Walt and Jesse's relations begin through the drug business, and mostly remain within it, so every decision that Walt makes regarding Jesse correlates to business in some aspect. Nothing can be denoted as purely personal, and this is where it becomes complicated, because how many of Walt's caring actions are genuine, and how many are merely moves that defend himself, his reputation, or that fuel his ego? To bring back the Tuco confrontation, while Walt did avenge Jesse by intimidating Tuco and netting Jesse some money for his incident, the kick that he experiences later in the car isn't because of this, it's because of the pride he feels in asserting himself against a dangerous drug lord, confronting a violent and powerful man, and coming out on top. Does the respect and status such a stunt brings Walt not greatly outweigh the benefit it brought Jesse? And this is a recurring theme throughout the series. Everything he does that seems to serve Jesse always seems to serve him twofold. The dynamic that Walt really wishes to maintain is likely closer to that of a superior and an inferior. He wants Jesse to need him and to be above him. It's ironic how often the mantra 50-50 partners is repeated, because this is exactly what Walt doesn't want. He doesn't want a partner on his level of intelligence or skill, or even close for that matter. He wants someone inferior whom he can mold and control. This is precisely why he prefers and insists on working with Jesse over Gale, despite Gale being the superior chemist. There even exists an alike parallel between the intelligent and driven Gretchen and the seemingly ditzy and moldable Skylar, and that Walter wished for the same dynamic in his own marriage. Walt cannot stand someone trying to compete on his level, and so when him and Jesse are firmly in their roles of superior and underling is when Walt's most comfortable and they get along the most. The season 3 episode Greenlight has a scene that illustrates this perfectly. When Jesse comes to Walt informing him that he's going to begin working with Gus, Walt initially begins talking to him like a concerned father, citing Jesse's addiction as a reason to avoid the meth business. Yet as soon as Jesse takes out a batch that he has cooked without him, Walt is nonplussed. His tone shifts significantly, sounding accusatory and antagonistic. He cannot handle that Jesse doesn't need him. At this point in the story, Walt has lost his job at the school and learned of his wife's affair, and his relation to Jesse and the meth business is the one sphere in which he has control. Perhaps his reaction is exasperated by the poor circumstances, but there's also a point to be made that this is how Walt truly feels, and it's only at his lowest when it can come out, where the controlled and cunning side of him is absent to obscure his true feelings. It is always because of the business through which they became acquainted that they clash. Although their line of work is inherently violent, we see in the show that Gus managed to create and sustain a successful operation that ran smoothly for years. It was only when Walt comes around that the conflict truly escalates. Walt sabotages and betrays business partners and close associates because it serves him. It elevates him as the superior that is in control, an intrinsic protest against a diagnosis that has taken that away from him and activated a dormant drive to fight and assert his will, no matter the cost. Any type of relationship, be it business or personal, will inevitably fail when one party actively prioritizes itself to the detriment of the other, and this behavior is one Walt exhibits repeatedly throughout the series. One of the earliest examples of this is Walt's interaction with Elliot in the episode Grey Matter. Having learned of Walt's lung cancer diagnosis for his wife, Elliot offers him a job at Grey Matter, the company that Walt had co-founded and worked for long ago, reiterating that the firm has excellent health insurance. Walt's reaction to this proposition, at this very early stage of the story, tells us all there is to know about him. The daunting terror of the cancer diagnosis stems mostly in the fear that his treatment will bankrupt him, that he won't be able to work, and his family will not be taken care of. And under these circumstances does he make the decision to enter the drug business. And yet here we have another option, that is legal, that is safe, that is not guaranteed to provide everything which Walt was so desperately searching for. But he won't take it. Elliot sees that Walt is in need and makes every effort to help him, like any good friend should, even if his company doesn't need the role, or it may be a liability to employ a terminally ill man. Elliot nonetheless offers it at his own expense, with the overwhelming motive being to help this man he sees as a friend. Now compare this to how Walt acts. He receives a golden ticket out, almost a deus ex machina, and it's not enough for him. Walt immediately understands that Elliot knows about the diagnosis because of Skylar, and yet he fails, or at least doesn't care, to see the implications as to why she told him. Because Skylar, like Walt, was looking out for the family, and she found an alternative much more preferable to manufacturing narcotics. Walt already knew what was at stake here. He'd already killed 2 people in the short time he'd been in the business. He knew he was putting his life on the line, and the safety of his family too. But even so, when given the option to leave that behind, he declines, and is even offended by the pitiful proposition and angered at his wife. Because Walt isn't really prioritizing his family, he's prioritizing himself, his ego. Elliot didn't do him wrong. Walt himself had made the decision to leave Grey Matter and sell his share. It was this mistake that was his own that he channels out as anger and bitterness, an ego that feels it must be avenged for a wrongdoing that was really of its own making. If Walt had swallowed his pride and taken the job, he would become much closer with Gretchen and Elliot. His treatment would be taken care of, he would have a good salary, and if he passed from cancer, the pair would almost certainly support his family. Of course, the problem with this timeline is that it disgusts Walt. The last thing he wants is to depend on Elliot's money, so he chooses drug manufacturing over the secure job at Grey Matter, as to retain his pride, and hopefully one day tell the pair, "I told you, I didn't need you." Elliot treats Walt like a friend, whilst Walt treats him like an enemy, and takes his concern and care as an insult. One of the most celebrated set pieces of Breaking Bad is undoubtedly the end of season 4, and the catalyst for it all is one of the most malicious decisions that Walt ever makes, for many the turning point at which he becomes the villain. That is, of course, the poisoning of Brock. For Walt, this was a decision made out of desperation. Backed against the wall by Gus, Walt fears the worst for himself and his family, so he concludes that he must, by any means possible, turn Jesse against Gus to save his hide. And that includes forcibly involving an innocent child and its mother into their game, as a means to make Jesse upset enough for him to agree to partake in Gus's assassination. This is the ultimate betrayal against his friend, and acts as the straw that broke the camel's back. Instead of reasoning with Jesse and trying to win his goodwill, Walt instinctively, almost without second thought, decides to manipulate his friend and to hurt him greatly, to hurt someone that is important to him. In that moment, Walt's decision says that Jesse's pain is irrelevant, that it doesn't matter how much he suffers, as long as Walt gets what he wants. It's no surprise that towards the end of season 5, when Jesse finds out about this, he immediately turns against Walt, and it acts as the final fallout between the pair. Because Jesse saw that Walt was not only willing to put an innocent child in jeopardy to fulfill his agenda, but he was also willing to go behind the back of his friend, manipulate him and hurt him. And such a friend is no friend at all. One of the main things that prevents Walt from having a healthy friendship with Jesse is his intelligence coupled with his pride. That creates a unique lens through which he views relationships. A lens that can very aptly be described as Machiavellian, taking its namesake from politician Niccolo Machiavelli, whom writes, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, because love is preserved by the link of obligation, which owing to the baseness of men is broken at every opportunity for their advantage. But fear preserves you by a dread of punishment, which never fails." At almost every turn in the series, this is proven true. In such a business, only fear can earn you respect and keep you alive. Walt, being perceptive, understands this, but doubtless takes it too far. He would rather instill fear than love to get what he wants. And nothing exemplifies this behavior better than Walt's inaction upon seeing Jane choking to death. Is there an argument to be made that he wasn't responsible for her death, and that she was a ticking time bomb? Perhaps that Jane might have taken Jesse down with her if given the chance. Maybe. But despite all of this, Walt was well aware how much Jane meant to Jesse, just like how he knew that Brock and Andrea were important to him, and he takes that love and twists it to his own advantage. He knew Jane's death would crush him, but he didn't do anything to stop it, because he prefers him crushed and weak than strong and independent. It's precisely this Machiavellian mindset that keeps Walter alive and makes him successful in the drug business, at the cost of everything else in his life. Jesse, on the other hand, never truly adopts this mentality, for which he suffers. His love and care for others is used against him time and time again. At the beginning of season 5, when Walt doesn't have money to fund his part of the operation, Jesse covers. When Walt protests to paying legacy costs to keep Gus's men in prison from talking, Jesse offers to cover again. And he has no issue continuing to pay it, whilst Walt prefers to kill all 11 men, and he eventually does. A decision that would cause a chain of events for which Walt would pay dearly. The same ruthlessness that allowed him to get so far would be the hubris that would instigate his collapse. Breaking Bad is at its core a drama about a man's reckoning with his looming demise. Walt was trampled by life before his diagnosis, and instead of letting it crush him even further and take away the last bit of agency he has left, Walt channels all of his dormant anger to bring back every part of his will and drive to the forefront. And that's what makes the story interesting. The ego we see him develop throughout the series is an outward manifestation of years of suppression. And it's the concoction of will and ego that impending doom has thrust upon him that allows Walt to excel so much within the business, not only as a manufacturer, but on the streets. The only downside to this is as his power grows, his relationships collapse. Roman statesman Cicero talked of a tyrant called Dionysius, whom was the most powerful man in Sicily and feared by all. Yet the man lived in constant fear and had no friends, and wouldn't even allow barbers to shave him with a razor out of paranoia. This is the cost of absolute power earned through fear, and Walt's great empire that came to fruition due to his insatiable lust for power, in turn brought his own relationships with his family, friends, and his business partners to a tempestuous end. Thank you very much for watching.